Hello again and welcome to another episode of the Franchise Everything podcast, where we talk about everything and anything franchising. And today I'm in Brisbane with Dustin Slypen, who's a business broker who's specialising in the health and wellness niche. Is that right, Dustin?
Correct.
It is. And you're not just a business broker, you're an award-winning business broker in this space. What awards have you achieved in this?
Oh, thanks. You're making me blush. So I've won the REIQ Business Broker of the Year in 2020 and 22, and then numerous awards throughout the Link network.
Yep.
But yeah, they're all on the website if you want to check them out.
Excellent. Check it out always. Got to mention the awards, mate. I'm sure they're very hard earned. So today we're going to talk about something that's, I know it's important to a lot of people looking at the fitness or the health and wellness industry, which is valuing a gym or fitness franchise. And this is a crucial thing, obviously, in getting this right. Now, how many deals do you reckon you've done in your time in the gym and fitness sort of space?
Over 100 transactions now, and probably more than 100 that haven't actually settled.
That you've worked on, that you've got nothing for.
I've worked on, got nothing for, perhaps had contracts signed that have been terminated. So I've been through the process over a couple of hundred times.
Excellent. All right. So you know a hell of a lot about it. So we went through some notes and everything and compared notes from our experience in it. And you came up with a handful of things that you really wanted to talk about in valuing business. And the first one is price expectation versus the actual reality of what the business is worth. Can we unpack that a bit? Yeah.
So we have a saying in our office, and it's basically saying get ugly early. And what we mean by that is really hitting a vendor between the eyes with what their business is worth from the start, and not try and overpromise to win a listing, giving them the reality of what the business is really worth. It might sound a little bit harsh, but a business is worth what it's worth based on the profitability, not what you spent setting it up. So,
do you find that's a common issue?
In most cases, the two biggest factors that we see with a business that's overpriced is a seller that thinks their business is worth what they set it up for, or their business is worth what the potential it has. Now, you can't value a business on potential. We've got to value it on the runs that are on the board, so to speak. What it's making, what the performance of the business in its current format. And we see businesses that have spent a couple of $1 million being set up from scratch that are breaking even. Then you've got other businesses that have spent maybe a couple of $100,000 being established from scratch that are making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. So it's really irrelevant what those original fit out costs were or startup costs were. It's all based on what the business is doing right now.
And as far as that expectation versus reality, where do you see the blowout in that? So those value blowouts that you see there about cost of setting up, how do they occur? How does it happen to a gym like that or a fitness business?
Well, look, nothing's cheap these days, especially if you're setting up a big box facility. Like, it can be really expensive. Not just your equipment costs, but you've got your plumbing, you've got your painting, your electrical installations, you got your town planning, you got to get council approval, you got solicitors involved. It can blow out so quickly, and then obviously you've got your building costs, which are just through the roof at the moment. So all of a sudden, what you were originally thinking might be a $500,000 or $600,000 establishment cost, it can all of a sudden be up to $800,000-$900,000, just before you've even opened the doors. And then on top of that, you got to implement marketing plans before you open the doors so that you've actually got cash flow from day one. So it can be a really expensive process setting it up from scratch. And then a vendor might come to us 3 or 4 years down the track. Their balance sheet is showing that, the business owes them $750,000, $800,000 perhaps.
Primarily from when they first set it up.
Correct. And the business might be making $100,000 a year of a normalized operating profit. And we just have to really be honest and truthful with them and just tell them that the reality is their business is worth nowhere near what it actually costs them to set it up. However, it's saleable, and we can help them. We can help them get out. We can transition them out. But the reality is they're not going to get a sale price worth what they originally set the business up for.
And that's the expectation via reality.
Yeah, correct.
So how do those conversations go? Are they difficult conversations to have? And by the way, if you can hear a bit of noise in the background, we are in a working office here, so we can't get the whole office to stop. So there's lots of calls happening and everything going on in the background if you can hear.
A few deals being done.
Yeah.
So look, those conversations primarily go down as well as the vendors willing to cooperate. We have some vendors that are extremely cooperative and they just want to be told the truth so that they're not going to be burnt down the track.
Yep. And wait months and months and months while it sits on the market.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then we have the stubborn vendors. And this is, I'm not just talking about fitness, I'm talking about all industries. We have those stubborn vendors that just can't be told anything. They know what their business is worth and that's all they're going to get for it. And they're really tough conversations to try and have. But if someone's willing to cooperate with us, get their accountant involved early, listen to what the market's willing to pay, they're the ones that usually get a really fair and quick result.
Okay. So the second one we wanted to move on to, apart from that first one we touched on, was the franchise requirements. So being a franchise business, obviously there's certain fit requirements and that sort of stuff that are required for updating when valuing a franchise. Can you touch on those?
Yeah. So the modernisation expectations with a franchise gym sale usually have a massive impact on the end sale result of that business. Now, to make the process so much more streamlined and go smoothly, I always try and get the vendor to understand exactly what those modernisation expectations are before listing the business. In a dream scenario, they've just completed the modernisation.
So it's almost all brand new and ready to roll.
Yeah, so a buyer can walk in and the place looks absolutely schmick. It's up to the brand's expectations. It's met all the compliance and franchise requirements. So it's basically a turnkey operation with already, an established membership base and staff and systems in place. Where we run into trouble is when we have a vendor that it might be 12, 18, maybe even 24 months overdue for a modernisation. They come to us, they tell us, they underplay it. They tell us, look, the modernisation is going to cost $100,000. And we go through due diligence. The buyer gets excited. We sign contracts. The assignment of lease is underway. They've even had franchisor approval. But then the franchise disclosure is submitted to the buyer. The compliance team comes out to do an audit check on the club and they turn around and say, well, it's going to be a $250,000 modernisation to get this place up for scratch. And then the tough conversations have to be had around a price renegotiation to factor in those exuberant modernisation costs.
Which is difficult on all parties in changing. Changing
absolutely.
From the position that they thought they'd established.
Correct. So the best, it's preparation. So the best way to navigate through that is just being prepared right from the start and having, if you don't have quotes already from suppliers, just getting an approval plan in place with the franchisor with a ballpark figure of what those costs can be.
And what are the typical things that, like, how often are they changing equipment or having to modernise equipment every set number of years, quite often in your experience?
Yeah, so every brand is different. But what you usually find is with the 24/7 facilities and the big box facilities, they're changing their cardio gear every 5 years and their strength equipment every 10 years. Now, where this is really subjective, and I don't want to sound too controversial, is...
Controversy is always good.
So look, what I really find unfair in the fitness franchising industry of modernisation requirements is when they put a time frame on the changeover of equipment opposed to usage. So you've got a gym with 1,000 members and at the 5-year mark is having to replace its cardio equipment, which is bloody expensive. And they're having to do a full cardio refurb at 5 years. And then you've got a gym with 500 members, so it's had half the usage. And they're having to do it at the same time. And that modernisation requirement can absolutely be detrimental to that business and can actually sink them. So I think it's time franchisors started to actually get out there and actually audit the equipment on a usage basis rather than just at the 5-year mark we're going to replace it.
Is it challenging to do?
I don't think it is. And you've got some smaller operators that are thinking about the franchisees and they do have a lot of, I suppose, compassion for this. But the biggest players in the industry, they're getting massive kickbacks from the suppliers. So they want the equipment updated as often as possible because it's great for their business, right? So it's a balancing act. If the business can afford it, yes, happy days, get it done, keep everything, I suppose, with a uniformed look and feel. But some small businesses just can't afford it.
So you said kickback from suppliers. You find that's common in the space?
Very common.
It's for taking the equipment into the business.
Correct. So the suppliers will do deals with the franchisors, and they'll get the franchisor will get a kickback on all the equipment that's ordered through that particular supplier.
Okay, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
I think that's a whole other podcast. We'll discuss that one. Let's jump into that some other time.
And I'm sure it's not foreign to most industries.
No, yeah. I think equipment suppliers for sure. Okay, so the third one we want to talk about was membership income and apportionment. You mentioned apportionment. I didn't know what you were talking about with that sort of thing as far as this goes. So can you unpack that for us, the apportionment of income?
Okay, so in a fitness business, whether it's a functional training facility, a 24/7 franchise gym, or a Pilates studio, there'll be various types of income methods. And the most common in the industry is the direct debit, either weekly or fortnightly, is how the member pays. Now, most franchise gyms and functional training franchises, 95% of their revenue is direct debit weekly or fortnightly, where the member pays a fee, it comes out of their account straight into the business account. Easy. Where we run into a few hurdles is when a business, particularly...
And this impacts valuing the business?
It does impact valuing the business. I'll go into how that affects it next. But if you've got a business, and it's usually independent operators, they'll offer a lot of paid in advance deals. And that might be, $400 for a 12-month membership. And that's paid up front in one big lump sum. Now, when you've got a big chunk of your income as paid in advance, a buyer comes in, they see that 40% of your revenue is actually paid in advance memberships, and they've got to service those members without income. So usually a sophisticated buyer or solicitors or accountants will get involved in the contract negotiations and will want to see those paid in full memberships apportioned at settlement so that it's fair.
So apportion it as in claw back some of that. If there's 6 months remaining on that, then $200 of that $400 would go back to the buyer.
Correct. Now, when you break it down into how does that affect the value of the business? Well, it affects the end sale result. So if you've got a contract of sale at $500,000, yet there's a $50,000 pro rata apportionment going to happen at settlement, you're going to be left with $450 as a sale price at the end. So the key to maximising the sale result is getting as many members on direct debit arrangements as possible.
Okay, it's a good tip for people looking at it. So we've just covered there. So especially price versus or expectation versus reality, refit, and also member income and apportionment. What is more important? What are people coming at you when they're wanting to value their business or valuing their business? Are they doing it primarily on members and direct debits? Is that the main thing that they want to, and not worry about these other things? Is that the type of conversations you're facing when you're looking at valuing gyms? Yeah,
it's a good question. So usually people want to tell us straight away how many members they've got.
I bet it's a big number, isn't it? That's the top line number.
Correct. However, it's not about the number of members, it's about the yield per member. So a fitness centre with 700 members at $20 a week compared to a gym with $1,000 of members at $11 a week is a massive difference. So what I want to know straight away from the vendor is not exactly how many members you got, but what is your average yield per member? That's really important data to understand, especially when you're valuing the business on a cash flow forecast basis as well. So what it did 12 months ago is quite irrelevant in the whole value in the business as well, because you've got a buyer that's coming in and they're buying cash flow. So they want to know, what is it doing right now?
Yeah, critical number. So the fourth thing we want to talk about was the lease. So understanding the lease. And I think the lease is a foreign thing for a lot of people in every industry. It's something that franchise partners in particular sort of step out of, and franchisors get a lot involved in. So how does the lease impact the valuing of a gym or fitness business?
Yeah, the lease is probably the most vital part of the equation, I think, when it comes to selling a business. And a landlord should be your business partner in many aspects, but it can be terminal and it can be unforgiving dealing with a landlord, and they can make or break.
If they don't have your interests at heart.
Correct.
Yeah.
Particularly shopping centres. So how does it affect value in the business? Well, for starters, banks will only lend against the length of the lease. Now, banks are usually looking at leases that are at least 5 years, even longer if they can. They want at least 5 years of tenure to lend against. So it's really important that a seller understands the buyer's requirements with a lease, and they've either got to have enough length on that lease, whether it's the current term or an option, that is going to suffice the banks, or they're going to need to be confident enough in the buyer being able to negotiate a new lease or an extension to lease to be able to meet the bank's requirements as well. Then you look at it with the franchising industry, and they want the lease to match up to the franchise agreement. So we've got
a lot of things have to align.
Oh, they do. And this is where we come in as brokers. We're having to manage the expectations of all these external stakeholders. So there's quite a lot of moving parts to getting a deal over the line. It's really easy having a buyer make an offer and having that accepted, but actually executing it to the finish line that's where we earn our.
Yeah, because it's not as clean as it might appear, is it, the whole deal?
Correct. And where a lot of vendors run into trouble is when they get close to nearing the end of their lease. There might be 6 months, 12 months remaining on the lease. They come to us to sell because they're having second thoughts about, do I really want to take this business on and renegotiate the new
Do I want to commit another 5 years?
Yeah, do I want to exercise the option or do I walk away? Obviously, walking away is the worst case scenario because financially they get nothing out of it. And then secondly, quite often if they do walk away at the end of their term, they've got a make good clause. So it can be quite expensive to
make good, as in put the premises back to how it was before they did anything to it.
And look, you might have the most gorgeous fit out, but a landlord wants an empty shell, which is really unfortunate at times. But
depressing, really.
Absolutely. They want an empty shell to show to your clients. So understanding what your lease requirements are, particularly through an assignment, is absolutely vital. I've had deals fall over on settlement day based on conversations with landlords and buyers deciding to walk away from deposits rather than sign a lease.
So what position are landlords taking in those scenarios? So what are you seeing?
Well, quite often if it's a shopping centre, there's no emotion involved. They could not care. They have one agenda, and that is to maximise the rental return because it boosts the value of the building. They really, if someone walks away from a deal, you would think they would care, but quite often they're so well off that it's irrelevant to them. They would rather have an empty shop and defend their rental figure than have someone in on a reduced rate.
Yeah, they'd rather take the loss for a few months.
Yeah.
Or the reduced income.
Yeah.
Wow. It's not a good proposition to be in, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. And then you've got that they might throw caveats into a lease that can throw a deal out, such as they want 2 personal guarantors on the lease.
So effectively, you've got no bargaining power whatsoever.
None.
Yeah, take it or leave it.
Yep, correct. Whereas the vendor, if they knew their position earlier, they could have exercised an option to cut all these issues out earlier, or they could have renegotiated another lease term and then put the business on the market. So there's no guesswork involved.
So do you think shopping centres are using these lease events as an opportunity by saying, look, I know he really wants to sell this thing so we can push it a bit higher?
Yeah, well, it comes down to the appetite of the landlord. So we've had instances where a landlord of a small strip shop, for instance, is wanting to put the centre on the market. The best way for them to maximise their result is to actually have it fully tenanted out on great long-term leases.
Long-term leases, I can imagine. Yeah, that income is definite coming in, isn't it?
That's right. So they're offering some amazing incentives to get the owners of the business to recommit to a lease. Like we're talking, it might be 12 months rent-free or 60,000 rent abatement, whatever it might be, to entice them to sign that lease so that when it goes on the market, they've got a fully tenanted asset. With great rental yield.
I think a lot of people wouldn't know that there sometimes can be some pretty significant rent contributions, can't they? And even fit out contributions by landlords. Do you see a lot of that in your space?
Yeah, only with startups. So very rare on an assignment of lease, but definitely on a greenfield side if someone's going in and they've got a significant brand new, and they're wanting to sign and this is the other thing too, you got to put your shoes into the landlord as well. If you're willing to sign a longer lease, the better incentive you're going to get.
Yeah.
So 10 years plus, you'll find that incentive is significant.
And it might help you reduce your fit-out cost to start with.
Absolutely, yeah. But I've had instances where this happened in Ipswich, a franchise gym, going in there. They got a $120,000 fit-out contribution from the landlord in a shopping centre. They thought it was fantastic. Business never got off the ground, struggled from day one. They've tried to sell this business. In the end, it sold for $1, taking over equipment finance. What they didn't forecast was in the lease, there was a clawback. That fit-out contribution would be paid back on a pro rata basis when they assign the lease. So after 12 months, they're wanting to sell the business and that was equivalent to approximately $100,000 fit-out contribution we paid back.
So the fit-out was only available for that individual business owner.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep, correct. So they can be great, but
watch
really
the fine print.
Correct, yeah. I really understand what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, and the fifth thing I want to talk about was valuing the business based on the multiple, whether it depending on functional fitness and the different types of gyms there. What do you see in practicality in the market?
Yeah, so very different business models. So you've got your 24/7 franchise gyms and your big box facilities. They are valued very differently to your functional training, fitness franchises and your boutique fitness businesses. Yep. So when I say boutique, I'm talking about your CrossFit, your personal training studios, Pilates, yoga. Yeah, so and quite often you'll find in the functional training and boutique space, they're very staff heavy. And reliant on their staff. Whereas in your 24/7 space in your big box fitness centers, you've got swipe card entry or mobile phone app entry.
Yeah, because I mean, they're 24 hours, they're set up like that and they're really built for it, aren't they?
Correct. So you're staffing at those facilities. Your staff are actually more of a luxury to meet and greet you and make you feel great. Whereas in your functional training and your boutique fitness, your staff are your business. And what I find is a lot of vendors, they hear about a 24/7 facility selling for a multiple of 3, maybe 3.5 times.
When you say multiple, for those who don't understand, what do you mean by multiple of?
So a multiple of your operating profit is what the business will be appraised on. Yep. So a lot of fitness businesses can sell for multiples anywhere between 1 up to 5 times, depending on a whole range of factors.
Of all the factors we've talked about.
All the factors we've talked about, whole range of factors. And but a functional training or a boutique fitness business is so reliant on its staff that the goodwill quite often sits with the staff. And should those staff leave, or should the owner leave and step out of the business, a lot of the clientele can go. Yeah, business can
because they have those relationships with them and they trust that person. Enjoy.
Correct.
It's an evening out, or it's when they're there. It's a social interaction for them, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've created a culture.
Yeah.
And it's a real buzz and vibe that they've created, and it can work both ways. But what?
So I think you're saying you mean by that if it's bad, then a new person coming in who can give it life can actually lift the performance of that business.
Yeah, and one thing I try and advise vendors against is occasionally you'll get a vendor that's created a magnificent culture and has a pumping membership base in a functional training business, all based on the energy of that owner, and they want to tell a potential buyer just how successful the business is based on what they've created, which is a big no-no, because all that does is put all this fear through the buyer that when that owner transitions out,
you're not going to be able to achieve what I've done.
Correct.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's better off saying very little than really spruiking your success.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. We've unpacked a lot in just a few minutes, haven't we?
We have.
Excellent. I'm sure there's plenty more to do, and no doubt we're going to talk many more times.
I hope you got something out of it.
Excellent.
And really enjoyed it.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for joining us, Dustin.
No, thank you.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Franchise Everything podcast. If you like this sort of stuff, you want to see more of it, please like, subscribe, do the sharing, all that sort of stuff that we need to help the podcast grow. And we'll catch you again in the next episode soon.